Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. All right, man, I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. For all my people that are coming from the Philippines, I would say mabuhay to you, kamusta king makaibigan, masaya kang kinikay. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. I do have your kababayan, Wesley. So, make sure I said that right, man. Yeah, kababayan. Yeah, kababayan. Yeah, I got your boy. Yeah, so this is round 26, so I went back around. This is Fabiano Caruana versus Wesley. So we're gonna go ahead and take a look and see what we have for this game. If you guys are ready to go, you ready? Okay, let's go. All right, I'm ready. All right, so we got D4, D5, we got C4. Normally in this position you're gonna see like a E6, or if you're gonna go into a Slav, then you got C6 in this position. But we do see pawn takes C4, so we do have the Queen's Gambit accepted, and it's not really a gambit. I mean, this pawn is going to be pretty easy to recover. I mean, if you don't play correctly as white, then black can just basically say, hey man, I got a pawn, but it takes a lot of moves for black to get that pawn. So we do see knight to F3, we got knight to F6, we got E3, E6, bishop takes C4, we do have A6. And you're not really worried about b5 in this position here. You're just going to back up the bishop. You can back it up here, or even back to e2, whatever you prefer. But it's not as damaging as, it is in the Benoni. So we do have castles by white. We got c5, just trying to break down white's center. We got bishop back to e2. Pawn takes d4, knight takes d4. We got bishop to e7. Knight comes to d2. Castles by black. We got b3, b5. Bishop comes to b2. We see bishop to b7. We got rook over to c1. We see queen down to d7. We got bishop to f3. Rook comes to a7, which might look kind of strange. I mean, it is the top move in the position. Also, bishop takes f3 is fine as well. I mean, you can also just kind of just leave, the bishop where it is, or maybe develop. No, you can't develop knight. So yeah, rook to a7 is a pretty beneficial move. We see queen over to e2. We got bishop takes f3 now. Knight takes f3. We see rook over to c8. And even though it did kind of look weird at first, that rook to a7, you are preparing to double your rooks and to take over the c file completely. So we do see knight to e5. Just, hit the queen a little bit. So we do see queen back to e8. And then we do see the novelty of the game, which is a4. You're just opening the game up a little bit more on the side. Swing your rooks over maybe, something like that. So the pawn takes a4, pawn takes a4. You see rook a to c7, and something kind of has to give. You see rook takes c7, rook takes c7, and then rook over to a1. You see queen over to c8. So as you can see, black is just constantly trying to take over this file. Also, their knight is a little bit weird. So, I mean, they're pretty much going to be going knight b to d7. It looks a little dangerous to go knight to c6 at the moment. We do see h3. We got knight b to d7. Knight takes d7. Knight takes d7. And then we do have a5. We're thinking maybe at some point we can get a piece here. And if we see trades, we'll have a passed pawn. So we're trying to look into the future with that. So we do see bishop to f6. We got bishop to a3. Bishop takes d4. Pawn takes d4. We see rook down to c3. We see bishop to d6. We got rook to c1 with check, rook takes c1, queen takes c1 with check, king goes to h2. And, everything is looking pretty good for both sides. I mean, they pretty much, have the same amount of material. You do have a bishop against the knight in an open position. So, I mean, it might favor white slightly, but, I mean, it says it's dead even right now. And there's not really much that either side can really do to force the issue. So we do see queen up to c6. Why not attack the undefended bishop? Because it's just sitting up there, not minding its own business in black's camp, being nosy. So the bishop comes back down to g3. We see h6. We see d5. Pawn takes d5. Queen goes to e8 with check. And after we see king over to h7, we see queen takes f7. And we have successfully, isolated one of black's pawns. As you guys can see, white does kind of have a slight weakness with this d4 pawn. So, pushing it to d5 was actually really nice because get rid of it. You're also trying to deflect the queen away because you can be winning the pawn on a6 and actually be giving yourself an outside pass pawn, which is worth a little bit more. But like I said, we did come up to here and then we took on f7. So we basically turned the tables on black, and now black has the weakness. You know, it's not anything crazy, but I mean, it can be somewhat significant riding this into an endgame. So we do see d4. We see queen down to f5 with check. The king comes back to g8. We see queen down to d3. Let me see. Pop this down just a touch. Okay. We do see queen to d5. We got queen takes a6. We got d3. I mean, this pawn is a little fast, man. I'm not going to lie to you. And so we do see queen to c8 with check. The knight comes back to f8. We see a6. And it really just kind of looks like we're going to have a race and we're going to tie. So we got d2, a7, d1 equals queen, a8 equals queen, and whoa. The 4 queens game. Of course, these queens are directly about to come off the board, but it's pretty crazy looking at the position that we see right now. We do see queen takes a8, and we pretty much got everything back to normal. But it was looking pretty interesting there for a second. The queen comes up to d7. We see queen to b8. We got king to f7. We got bishop to d6. Knight down to g6. Of course, because we are threatening queen takes, you know, f8 with check. And we're just going to be winning a piece. So, you know, Wesley doesn't want that. So he says, I'm going to go ahead and go knight to g6. We got f4. And because white has an extra pawn, they are going to be trying to get their pawns rolling and try to, you know, control as many squares as possible. The queen comes down to b3 with check. We see king to g6. The bishop goes down to e5. We see knight to f5. We see queen down to c2, pinning. And we are hoping to get g4 in. But of course, like I said, Wesley, he likes his pieces. You know, he's too malakas for that. So we got king up back to f7. We got g4. But like I said, white with their extra pawn, they are trying to control as much of the board as possible. And you do kind of have to be, you know, pretty careful with your movements. Knight down to e3 is going to be looking at queen to b3 with check. And that is going to be forking the situation. So you got to be kind of careful. So the knight comes back to e7. We see king up to g3. We got g6, bishop down to b2. We see knight to d5. Queen comes to e4. And then we have queen to e6. And we have actually reached the point in the game that if you do want to pause the video and see what move white should play in this position, go ahead and do so. Okay, so any of you guys that watch my videos, you guys know that when I say, you know, you're up material, you want to trade down, right? Because then an end game should favor you, right? Well, it's like almost always the case when that is the situation. But one of the other things that you hear me talk about too is trying to get your pieces into a better position and making sure that you're not like trading and like helping your opponent out. So if you notice the situation after the queen takes here on e6, the king takes, it actually helps improve your opponent's king just a little bit. So you've actually kind of given black a little bit. So the key move in this position is actually king to f3, because then you're basically telling black, hey, if you want to trade, you know, we can trade here and then that'll improve my king. And then you can see that's just a much better position, you know, for, you know, white to be in. If you go into this position here, as you can see, you know, white has a very, you know, a very nice decisive, you know, advantage. But we don't see that. After the king comes to f3, we see h5. We got queen over to d4. And why not, man? I mean, we're threatening some nasties on g7. So the pawn takes g4 with check. Pawn takes g4. We see the knight back to e7. And then we do place the attack on the king with queen g7 with check. As you can see, white has a very decisive advantage. The king comes back. The king comes back to e8. And you actually have the ability to go bishop to f6 in this position here. Just trying to remove the defender of this pawn and get yourself two completely passed pawns for, you know, just against nothing. But we do see king up to h8 with check. The king comes back down to f7. We got to repeat. So, you know, a lot of the times when you're watching these blitz games, you know, players do repeat moves. You know, it is because they want to just try to gain a little bit of time. They're not trying to draw. They're just trying to kind of give themselves a little bit more time. And it definitely helps when you're playing you know, a really short time game. You know, you can build your time up and give yourself more time to think later on. So the king comes back to e8. And then we do see bishop to c3. We got g5. The queen comes up to h8 with check. We see king to f7. We see f5. And now we have, you know, a pass pawn created. So we do see queen to d5 with check. We see king over to e3. And even though it looks kind of crazy, knight takes f5 with check, and then the pawn takes f5, and then we do see queen taking f5, and you do have, you know, a nice little pass pawn here. You have given up a piece, but if you ever get into a situation where the queens are traded, you know, you're going to be in a situation where you have a king and a bishop versus a king, and as you guys know, you cannot mate with that type of material. So the queen comes down to g7 with check, the king goes to e6, we see queen to g8 with check, the king goes to d7, we see queen to g7 with check, the king comes back down to e6. So, I mean, it pretty much looks like, you know, you're not really going to be able to make progress with either side. And I mean, if both players play correctly, they're pretty much just going to get into a draw. We see bishop to d4. We got g4. Starting to get that pawn rolling. Queen goes to g8 with check. We see king over to d7. The queen goes back to g7 with check. The king comes back to e6. We see the king come down to d2. Queen goes to e4. The queen goes to f6 with check. We see king to d5. Now you have to do something about that bishop. The bishop comes to e3. We see queen to b4 with check. The king goes over to e2. We see the queen to e4. Queen goes to f7 with check. We see king to d6. We see queen to f8 with check. And I mean, some of you guys might be wondering, like, why these different queen moves are being made over others. It's basically when you get into a position where the board is completely open and you have queens, you literally have like 15 to possibly 20 moves that you're going to have to try to calculate. When you're playing a blitz game, you're not going to be able to do that. So they're pretty much just kind of throwing checks out because, of course, as you guys know, you know, in any position, a check is going to be the first thing that you should look at because it's the most forcing. So we do, like I said, have king to d6. Queen goes to f8 with check. King goes back to d5. We see king over to d2. Queen goes to f3. We see queen to a8 with check. And then we have the king side stepping over to e5. And, of course, you cannot trade in this position because, you know, you have basically given up your only ability to checkmate your opponent with your queen. So the queen comes over to e8 with check. We see king to f5. Queen goes to d7 with check. And this is the part in the game where I'm not sure if it was calculation or if it was just like the move seemed to be okay. But we actually see king to g6. And this is actually giving white the ability to start pushing the issue. So we see queen to e6 with check. And then the king comes up to h7. But unfortunately, as you guys see the bar, this is completely mating. It is showing mate in 4. And we go queen to h6 with check. The king comes up to g8. And after we see... Really? Okay, cool. After we see the queen go to g6, this is the position that Wesley So resigns the game. And it is basically because you're either looking at a mate in 1 or a mate in 2. So if we want to look at the mate in 2, we see the king going over to h8, and then we see bishop to d4 with check. And then the only move that black can play is queen up to f6. Of course, that's going to be bishop to f6 with checkmate. And if we go back and we go king over to f8, we're going to be seeing bishop to c5, and that is checkmate in 1. So you can see the reason that Wesley So said, hey, man, I don't want to keep going on. And that is all she wrote. So like I said, this was the position that we were in where Wesley So did resign the game. So it is unfortunate. You know, basically, if in this position that we got to here, if Wesley So basically just like, you know, maintains moving the king into the center of the board, then we're going to be still good. I mean, king to e5 draws. Let me see. Where is it? Okay, yeah. King up here draws. King up here draws. Like pretty much everything that the king can do draws in this position, even up to g6. After queen came to e6, you had the ability to just step up, and that pretty much maintains everything because you're just going to pretty much go back and forth. So it was unfortunate that he started to move to the edge of the board. So this should be a good reminder that, you know, you always want to, when you get into an endgame, when you have a king and it's an open board, you always want to try to keep the king in the center of the board as much as possible. Because if you start to go to the edge or the corner, you put yourself in situations where you can be boxed and checkmated. So be very careful with that. As you can see, it doesn't matter who you are subject to making these types of decisions. So if you tend to put yourself in checkmating positions a lot, don't be sad because even Wesley So being, you know, top 5 in the world can do it too. So I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Maraming salamat, aking makaibigan, and I'll see y'all next time.